I never meant to listen. The call had ended, or so I thought. I had just finished telling my daughter Jessica that I transferred the monthly grocery money into our joint account. She thanked me, her voice dripping with that sweet, high-pitched tone she only used when she needed a favor. She told me she had to run and asked me to hold on for a second while she checked something. I stayed on the line. I always did, but the line didn't disconnect. That was how I heard it. First, the sound of a heavy door closing. Then Jessica's voice, lighter, more amused than I had ever heard it when speaking to me. She's too stupid to notice Jessica laughed, the sound echoing slightly, probably in her spacious bedroom upstairs. "Are you sure that was David, my son-in-law?" His voice was thick with arrogance. "If she checks the bank app, she'll see the withdrawal for the resort." "David, please," Jessica scoffed. "She barely knows how to unlock her iPad. She just transfers whatever I tell her to. As long as she thinks she's helping us save for a baby, she'll hand over anything." I stopped moving. I was standing in my own kitchen, a wooden spoon halfway to my mouth, tasting the soup I was making for their dinner. The aroma of roasted chicken and garlic filled the air, a meal I spent 2 hours preparing for them. Everything in the room looked familiar, but none of it felt like mine anymore. Not the expensive espresso machine they bought with my card, not the oversized dining table they picked out, not even the silence in the house. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply pulled the phone away from my ear, looked at the glowing screen, and quietly tapped the red button. I stood there for a long moment, the silence wrapping around me. Then I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a woman who finally woke up. Tomorrow, things were going to change. They moved in 2 years ago. Jessica claimed they needed to save for a house of their own, and since I was a widow living alone in a 4-bedroom home, it made sense. Slowly, they took over. My sewing room became David's gaming cave. The master suite became theirs. I was pushed into the smaller guest room down the hall. I told myself it was fine. I told myself this was what mothers did. I walked into my small room, sat on the edge of the bed, and opened my laptop. Jessica was wrong. I knew exactly how to use technology. I just preferred the quiet of a simple life. I logged into the banking portal. The screen loaded, displaying the joint account I set up to cover our shared household expenses. I scrolled through the transaction history. The truth stared back at me in bold, black numbers. $300 at a luxury hair salon. $800 for weekend flights to Miami. $1,000 to a boutique hotel. None of this was for groceries. None of this was for a baby fund. They were bleeding me dry, treating my retirement savings like their personal piggy bank. My chest tightened, but I pushed the emotion down. I didn't need to throw a fit. I didn't need an argument. I needed control. With a few precise clicks, I opened a new personal checking account at a completely different bank. Then I went back to the joint account. I didn't leave a single penny. I transferred the entire balance, nearly $40,000, directly into my new secure account. Next, I navigated to the credit card dashboard. I found the 2 supplementary cards I had authorized for Jessica and David. I clicked the small toggle switch next to their names. Status locked. I closed the laptop and took a deep breath. The house was quiet. Upstairs, I could hear the faint sound of their television. They had no idea the floor had just dropped out from under them. I turned off my bedside lamp and went to sleep. The next morning began exactly like every other morning. I woke up at 6, brewed a pot of dark roast coffee, and sat on the back porch with my newspaper. The sun was just starting to peek over the oak trees. At 7:30, the heavy footsteps started upstairs. Then, the frantic opening and closing of doors. Jessica stormed into the kitchen, her hair messy, holding her phone up like a piece of evidence. "Mom, is the Wi-Fi down? David is trying to join a morning meeting and the router is blinking red." I took a slow sip of my coffee, savoring the bitter warmth. I canceled the account this morning. I replied, not looking up from my paper. Jessica froze. What? Why? How are we supposed to work? You both make good salaries, I stated, plainly turning the page. You can set up your own internet service. The provider can probably come out by Thursday if you call them now. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked at me as if I had spoken in a foreign language. Before she could recover, David jogged down the stairs aggressively, tossing his briefcase over his shoulder. Internet's completely dead. I'm just going to head into the office, he muttered, reaching for the small hook by the door where we kept the keys. His hand grasped empty air. Where are the keys to the SUV? I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and pulled them out, letting them jingle in my palm. I have errands to run today. I'll be using my car. David frowned, his face turning a shade of red. But I always take the SUV on Tuesdays. My sedan has a flat tire, you know that. Then I suggest you call a tow truck. I smiled politely, slipping the keys back into my pocket. Or check the bus schedule. The 42 stops at the corner in 10 minutes. They stood in the kitchen, completely stunned. The free ride was officially over. By noon, my phone was buzzing relentlessly. I ignored the first 3 calls from Jessica. I was busy walking through a beautiful sunlit 2-bedroom condo with a lovely real estate agent named Barbara. The condo was 30 miles away from my current house, tucked into a quiet, peaceful neighborhood with a community garden. When my phone vibrated for the 4th time, I finally answered. Mom, Jessica practically screamed into the receiver. What is going on with the bank? My card just declined at Nordstrom. I'm standing at the register, looking like an idiot. I traced my fingers over the marble countertop in the condo's kitchen. I locked the cards. Jessica, those were for household groceries. Nordstrom doesn't sell milk. Unlock it right now, she demanded, her voice echoing with entitlement. I need to pay for these shoes. No, I replied, my voice steady and cold. Use your own money. I hung up. I didn't block her number, but I silenced it. I turned back to Barbara, who was pretending to look at a brochure to give me privacy. It's perfect. I nodded, gesturing to this bright living room. I'll make a cash offer today. Full asking price, provided we can close by next Friday. When I returned home that evening, the atmosphere was toxic. David was pacing the living room, his arms crossed. Jessica was sitting on the sofa, glaring at me as I walked through the door. You can't just cut us off without warning, David barked, stepping into my path. We have expenses. We have plans. I didn't flinch. I reached into my purse, pulled out a thick envelope, and handed it to him. What is this? He snapped. The property tax bill, the water bill, and the electricity bill, I answered smoothly. Since you have so many plans, you can plan on paying your share of the utilities. They're past due. David stared at the envelopes, the anger in his eyes quickly replaced by a flicker of genuine panic. For 3 days, a tense, suffocating silence hung over the house. Jessica and David refused to speak to me, acting like petulant teenagers throwing a silent tantrum. They left their dirty dishes in the sink, expecting me to wash them. They left their laundry piled high in the hallway. I stepped right over it. On Wednesday evening, Jessica walked into the kitchen looking exhausted. She opened the refrigerator, stared at the empty shelves, and sighed heavily. Mom, there's no food in here. Are you not grocery shopping this week? I was standing by the stove, flipping a single perfectly seasoned piece of salmon in the pan. I bought exactly what I need for the week. The bottom drawer is mine. The rest of the fridge is yours to fill. You're cooking just for yourself, she asked, sounding genuinely deeply offended. I am. I plated my salmon, added a scoop of roasted asparagus, and walked past her to the small kitchen table. An hour later, the house plunged into absolute darkness. The hum of the refrigerator died. The television in the living room shut off abruptly. Jessica screamed from upstairs, "Mom, the power is out." I calmly reached into my bag and pulled out the heavy-duty camping lantern I had purchased 2 days prior. I clicked it on, flooding my small room with bright white light. David stomped down the stairs holding his phone flashlight. "Did a transformer blow? Look outside. Are the streetlights on?" "The streetlights are fine." I called out from my room, reading my book under the lantern's glow. The power company followed through on their final notice. "I gave you the bill on Monday, David. You let them shut off the power," he yelled, rushing to my doorway. "I didn't let them do anything. You chose not to pay it." I turned a page. "I suggest you call them in the morning with your credit card. Good night." The next morning, Jessica and David scrambled. With no electricity and no hot water, the reality of their situation finally crushed their stubbornness. I watched from the window as David frantically made calls in the driveway, holding his credit card in the freezing morning air, begging the utility company for an expedited reconnection. They paid the bill. By noon, the lights were back on. I didn't stay to celebrate. I drove back to the real estate office. Barbara had the paperwork ready. The inspection was clean, and because I was paying in cash from the funds I had rescued from the joint account, the closing process was incredibly fast. I signed my name on the final line, feeling a massive weight lift off my shoulders. I had a new home, a space entirely my own. Back at the old house, the chaos continued. Without me doing their laundry, Jessica was forced to wash her own clothes. She ruined 2 of David's expensive dress shirts by washing them in hot water with bleach. I could hear them arguing through the vents. "Why didn't you just ask your mother how to do it?" David groaned. "Because she's acting like a crazy person," Jessica shot back. I ignored them. I went into my room, locked the door, and pulled out a stack of flattened cardboard boxes from under my bed. Working silently, I began packing my most precious belongings. Family photo albums, my jewelry box, Robert's old watches, and my favorite winter sweaters. I taped the boxes quietly and stacked them in my closet, hidden behind my winter coats. They thought this was a phase. They thought I was just throwing a tantrum to teach them a lesson, and that eventually I would go back to cooking, cleaning, and funding their lives. They were so incredibly wrong. Sunday morning brought a strange shift in the house. Jessica came downstairs early, wearing a soft smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She poured me a cup of coffee and slid it across the island. "Mom, listen." She started, her voice dropping into that sweet, manipulative tone again. "David and I talked. We've been really stressed lately, and we took it out on you. We're sorry." I took a sip of the coffee. It was weak, but I didn't complain. "Thank you, Jessica." She leaned in closer. "Can we just go back to normal? No more fighting. By the way, the mortgage due on the 1st. If you just unlock the account, I can go ahead and process the payment for you, so you don't have to worry about it." I looked at her, truly looking at the woman I had raised. She wasn't apologizing. She was negotiating. She wanted the vault reopened. "You don't need to worry about the mortgage, sweetie." I smiled warmly. "I've already handled it for this month." Relief washed over her face. She exhaled a long breath and hugged me. "Oh, thank goodness. You're the best mom. I knew you'd come to your senses." She grabbed her purse and happily headed out the door to meet David for brunch, entirely convinced she had won. She didn't know how I had handled the mortgage. I had paid it directly from my new account, yes. But immediately after I had signed the listing agreement with Barbara, 2 hours after Jessica left, a man in a high-visibility vest pulled up to the front curb. I watched from the porch as he hammered a heavy wooden post into the front lawn. He attached a large, glossy sign to the frame. "For sale. Open house. This weekend." I went back inside, made myself a fresh, strong cup of coffee, and waited for the explosion. It took them exactly 3 hours to come home. I heard the screech of David's tires in the driveway, followed by the heavy slam of car doors. The front door burst open. Jessica marched into the living room, her face pale, her hands trembling. David was right behind her, his jaw tight with fury. "What is that sign doing in the yard?" Jessica demanded, her voice cracking. I sat comfortably in my armchair, a knitting project resting on my lap. "It's a for sale sign, Jessica. I'm selling the house." "You can't do that," David yelled, stepping toward me. "This is our home. We live here. We have plans for this place." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't stand up. I just looked at him with absolute calm. "It is my house, David. My name is on the deed. My name is on the mortgage. You two are just guests. And guests eventually have to leave." "Where are we supposed to go?" Jessica cried out, genuine panic finally breaking through her anger. "We don't have enough saved for a deposit on a new place." "That is unfortunate," I replied plainly. "Perhaps if you hadn't spent $40,000 on vacations and luxury goods, you would have a down payment. You both have good jobs. You'll figure out a rental." "You're doing this to punish us," Jessica sobbed, pointing a finger at me. "Because of one stupid phone call." "No," I corrected her, setting my knitting aside. "I'm doing this because I am done being your bank, your maid, and your fool. The house goes on the market today. You have 30 days to pack your things. If you want to stay, you can buy it from me at market value." They stood frozen. They knew they couldn't afford it. The reality of their financial mess had finally caught up to them, and I wasn't going to bail them out. The following Friday, Jessica and David left for work early. They had barely spoken a word to me all week, choosing instead to whisper furiously in their bedroom. They were frantically searching for apartments, realizing quickly how expensive the city was when they didn't have a mother subsidizing their lifestyle. At 9:00 a.m. sharp, a small moving truck backed into the driveway. I opened the front door for the three movers. They worked quickly and quietly. I directed them to my small bedroom first, having them load the heavy boxes I had packed in secret. Then we moved to the dining room. I had them take the antique wooden table that belonged to my grandmother. I took my favorite reading chair, the good silverware, and the framed paintings from the hallway. I left their giant television. I left their massive cheap velvet sofa. I left the expensive espresso machine. I didn't want anything that held the memory of the last 2 years. By noon, the truck was loaded. The house echoed differently now, hollowed out and empty of my presence. It looked exactly like what it was, a temporary shell. I walked through the rooms one last time. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel nostalgic. I felt incredibly light, as if a heavy winter coat had finally been taken off my shoulders. I walked into the kitchen and placed my set of house keys on the center island. Next to it, I left a small handwritten note. "The realtor has a spare key for showings. Make sure the house is clean on weekends. Mom." I walked out the front door, locked it behind me for the last time, and climbed into my car. As I pulled out of the driveway, I saw Jessica's car turn onto the far end of the street, likely coming home for a lunch break. I didn't stop. I just kept driving. The new condo was everything I needed. The afternoon sun poured through the large glass doors, warming the hardwood floors. I spent the weekend unpacking, slowly arranging my grandmother's table in the dining alcove, and setting up my reading chair by the window. For the first time in years, the space around me was entirely my own. There were no heavy footsteps upstairs. There were no demands for money. There was just peace. On Sunday evening, as I was pouring a glass of crisp white wine, my phone buzzed on the counter. It was Jessica. I let it ring 3 times before I answered. Mom, her voice was ragged, defeated. "We found a small apartment, but they want first last, and a security deposit. We're short. We just need $2,000, please. Just this once." I promise, we'll pay you back. I looked out at my small garden. The hydrangeas were just starting to bloom. No, Jessica, I said softly. Mom, please? We're going to have to take out a high-interest loan, she pleaded. Then I suggest you read the terms carefully before you sign, I replied. You're an adult. You and David will figure it out. How can you be so cold? She snapped, the anger returning instantly. I'm not cold, I answered, taking a sip of my wine. I'm just no longer stupid enough to notice. I ended the call. I didn't wait for her response. I opened my phone settings and blocked her number along with David's just for the week. I needed a few days of absolute silence to settle into my new life. If there was a real emergency, they knew my email. I set the phone down, picked up my book, and sat in my chair by the window. The house was quiet, and finally, it was a silence I loved.